In the middle of the night, the glimmer of light from computer screens is still flickering in the apartment buildings that can be seen everywhere. In front of the computer desk, an ordinary-looking young man in his 20s yawned lazily. His left hand was pressing aimlessly on the mechanical keyboard in front of him, and the virtual character displayed in the center of the monitor was also swaying around with his fingers. Looking boredly at the empty city of Borealis on the screen, the man's eyes looked a little dull. 8.0 is really worthy of the disaster that the developers themselves admit. In order to fight the fire and forcibly reduce intelligence, in order to balance the strength of the two camps, they did not hesitate to abandon the rationality of the plot. It really deserves to be the legendary Interstellar team. Annoyedly throwing away the wireless mouse, the young man leaned on the back of the computer chair and sighed. It's almost time to AFK. Thinking of the disgusting secret realm created by the 7.0 Diablo team and the increasingly mindless plot, the young man looked at the ceiling and silently remembered the monster that made him spend the whole night. Go to sleep. I have to go to work tomorrow. The exhausted young man didn't bother to quit the game slowly, he directly pressed the power off button on the main box, moved his body with difficulty and threw himself onto the big soft bed. Before falling asleep, the last vague thought flashed through the young man's mind. Warcraft that carry the fond memories of many young people, can they really only live in the past? There was a strong smell of blood on the tragic battlefield, and green and red liquids mixed and seeped into the ground. There are a large number of mutilated corpses scattered all over the land that has been dyed in a strange color, and broken limbs and arms can be seen everywhere. Under the continuous shouts of killing on the battlefield, faint groans came from under the pile of corpses. A corpse that should have died suddenly pushed away the heavy object that was pressing on it, and opened its shimmering golden eyes to look around in bewilderment. Under the light of the bright moon hanging high in the sky, the appearance of this corpse that suddenly resumed its action can be vaguely seen. Strange violet skin, more than 2 meters tall, long and pointed elf ears. These characteristics alone are enough to prove that this person is not human, but some kind of fantasy creature that often appears in fantasy works. A wound about half a meter long, with bone deep visible, was cut on the chest of the corpse by an unknown weapon. Initial scabs had begun to form around the wound, but the dark red half-dried blood almost completely stained the upper body of the corpse red. Well, the action of pushing away the pile of corpses caused a pained expression to appear on the bewildered face of the man with silver short hair reaching the ears and a beard. Where am I? The man looked at the long wound on his chest in horror. In order to avoid further tearing the wound, he lay in the pile of corpses and did not dare to move for the time being. He could only slightly shake his head to observe the surrounding situation. As a veteran Warcraft player, the man simply glanced around, and the pupils of his eyes suddenly tightened. Night elves. And demons. Stretching out his hands and flipping back and forth in front of his eyes, he finally realized something was wrong with his body. This is not my body, who am I? Could it be time traveling? Although he wanted to slowly sort out his chaotic thoughts, but now that he was on the battlefield, he didn't have so much time for him to think too much. A doomsday guard with a ferocious face noticed the movement here from above, flapped its fleshy wings in midair, turned a corner, and rushed straight towards the direction of the traverser. The demon guard raised the broad-bladed two-handed giant sword in midair, with a bloodthirsty grin on his face. Small mortals, your world will burn for Sargeras. The visitor from another world who had just crossed over, endured the pain and rolled to the side at the critical moment. The severe pain in his chest distorted his face covered by the white beard, but fortunately he managed to escape the opponent's powerful slash at the last moment. If he was struck by this sword, he should not have to think about the wound anymore. Puff! The dull sound of the giant sword cutting into the pile of corpses came from the side, and the man hurriedly covered his chest that was bleeding again, and stood up crookedly from the pile of corpses. I don't know if it was because the corpse he had reborn still had some residual thoughts, and he couldn't control the extremely deep hatred towards the demon in front of him. This kind of hatred is not only aimed at the one demon in front of him, but extends to the entire demon group. His physical instinct made him subconsciously pull out a wooden stick stuck on the ground beside him, hold the center of the stick with one hand, and subconsciously lay it across his chest in a defensive posture. Roar! The Doomsday Guard glanced contemptuously at the long wooden stick held by the Night Elf on the opposite side, roared angrily and raised the two-handed giant sword high above his head, and launched a fierce jump and chop at the position where the Night Elf man was. Die! Whizzing! Just as the Traverser's muscles tensed up and he was about to roll to the side to avoid it again, several arrows pierced the night sky and precisely pierced into the body of the Doomsday Guard in midair. The added force in the arrow caused the Doom Guard to lose his balance in the air. While roaring in pain, he passively changed his jump trajectory, and slammed heavily on the ground about 5 meters beside the Night Elf man. The strange red and green soil was splashed by the impact of the Doom Guard when it landed, and a ball of it just flew into the face of the Traverser with a somewhat dull expression. Whoosh! Before the Doomsday Guard got up, another arrow pierced through the air, and it was firmly nailed to the forehead of the struggling demon, finally causing the Doomsday Guard to lose any signs of life. A large purple bird flapping its wings flew across the air, and a slim figure jumped off the bird's back, just in front of the traveler who was confused about the situation. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Before the Traverser could see the face of the other party clearly, the female Night Elf wearing the light armor of the Battle Priest first asked anxiously, "Andrea, are you all right?" Andrea? Is it the name of this body? The time traveler's heart tightened. He didn't have the original memory of the body he traveled through. Even if he can get away with it right now, sooner or later he will leak his feet in some details that the other party is familiar with. After weighing again and again, the Traverser finally chose to speak out. Who are you? Where am I? What are we doing? What? The young Night Elf with purple facial lines and long blue hair tied into a high ponytail showed surprise on his face. Andrea Moonshadow, have you been beaten to the head by a demon? I am Chandris, your friend Chandris Feathermoon, and this is the battlefield near Mount Hyjal. The traveler was terrified. Although he still didn't get any memory about the other party from his predecessor, as a traveler, the name Chandris Feathermoon would definitely not make him feel strange. San. Tease. Taking a closer look at Chandris's slightly youthful and beautiful face, the Traverser looked up at the battlefield under the worried eyes of the other party. In the distance, a huge wild boar is rushing left and right among the demons, and no demon can block its way. Under the command of a snow-white half-human half-bird creature, the overwhelming birds in the sky fought fiercely with the demon's evil bats and doom guards in the air. The scene in front of him caused the Traverser to show an extremely complicated expression. So, we are really fighting the Burning Legion. Is this the War of the Ancients? Battle of the Ancients is the name recorded by later generations for this tragic war against the Burning Legion by all races of Azeroth, and now it is said that it naturally arouses Chandri's doubts. Battle of the Ancients? No. Nothing. The Traverser rubbed his slightly tingling temple, and shook his head slightly. Sorry, Chandris, maybe I was really hit to the head, my memory is very confused, can you explain the current situation to me? Although Chandris felt a little unbelievable at what her friend said, she was still young at the time and didn't have much doubt, and told Andrea the current situation in every detail. Under Chandri's explanation, the time traveler with complicated emotions finally accepted the fact of time travel, and understood and acknowledged his new identity in this life. Andrea Moonshadow was born in the Valshara forest near Suramar city. Moonshadow and the Feathermoon family are neighbors to each other, and Andrea and Chandris are of course childhood sweethearts who grew up together. Both families are typical civilian families. Although the living conditions are completely incomparable with the extravagant magisters in Suramar city, thanks to the strong national power of the Dark Knight Empire, the lives of ordinary people are also very rich. The peaceful life continued until Andrea and Chandris grew up, and it came to an end with the invasion of the Burning Legion. A large number of alien creatures poured out from the portal in Suramur city, completely destroyed the peace of Valshera. Countless Night Elves civilians died under the merciless and brutal invasion of demons, and the Moon Shadow and Feather Moon families were no exception. When this topic was mentioned, Chandrese instinctively showed resistance and hatred. She did not describe in detail the tragedy she saw when she returned to her hometown, but simply said the reason why the two escaped the catastrophe. The Night Elves originated from the Well of Eternity. Under the magical transformation of this magic well, the Dark Trolls, which were originally just one branch of trolls, gradually began to evolve. They shed their ugly appearance and primitive and barbaric customs, and became a group of brand new species with great wisdom and longing for civilization, the Night Elves. Relying on the exploration of the secrets of the Well of Eternity, the Night Elves' civilization flourished and their living area expanded with the passage of time, gradually becoming a powerful force that cannot be ignored in the ancient Kalimdor continent. Different from the arcane energy mastered by the Highborn through the Well of Eternity, the commoners of the Night Elves have always paid attention to symbiosis with nature, and their philosophy of life has gradually attracted the curiosity and attention of a great being. He is the forest demigod Cenarius. Although Cenarius is very wary of the nobles of the Night Empire playing with arcane arts, he appreciates the life attitude of the lower Night Elf commoners. The two sides gradually became acquainted with each other over time, and Cenarius became friends with these nature-loving Night Elves. He has high hopes for this new intelligent race, hoping that they will become the guardians of nature like himself in the future. Under the guidance of Cenarius, some Night Elves began to try to get in touch with the way of nature, which was the original origin of the Druid sect. As the Night Elves followed Cenarius to learn the ways of nature, a Night Elf named Malfurion Stormrage gradually emerged. With his unparalleled talent and love of nature, he was honored to be Cenarius' direct disciple, the first mortal druid. At that time, Queen Ashera's crazy worship and exploration of the Well of Eternity intensified Cenarius' worries again. As a powerful wild demigod that has existed since ancient times, Cenarius is well aware of the instability of arcane energy, and he has always worried that the Night Elves' higher-ups will one day play with fire and burn themselves. In order to curb the spread of arcane worship in the Night Elf society, Cenarius decided to let his disciple Malfurion carry forward the ideas of the Druid sect. Malfurion, who was also born in Valshara, was entrusted by his mentor to first spread the way of nature in his hometown. Andrea was one of the people who was attracted by the ideas of the Druids. After subduing the Troll Empire, Ashera's prestige reached its peak, and the 6 major cities of the Night Empire, both nobles and commoners, had a strong sense of reverence for their queen. In the territory of the Night Empire, there is only one area that Ashera is unwilling and dare not to set foot in easily. There are many powerful wilderness demigods living in Mount Hyjal. Although he looked down on the wild forest and the demigods rolling in the mud, Ashera still ordered that in order to maintain the ancient tradition of the Night Elves being close to nature, the tribe was forbidden to set foot on the sacred Mount Hyjal at will. When Andrea followed Malfurion to Hyjal and learned the idea of druids for hundreds of years, Chandrese, his childhood friend, also embarked on his own path. Ilun, the moon god, is the true that all the Night Elves believe in devoutly. It was under her guidance that the Night Elves learned the name of the continent where they lived, Kalimdor, which means the land of ever-shining stars in Titan language. From then on, the Night Elves called themselves Kaldore, children of the stars. For thousands of years, the Night Elves' belief in Ilun has gradually spread to the whole family, and even the powerful Queen Ashera dare not challenge the authority of the moon god. In order to show his devout belief in Ilun, Ashera personally supervised the construction of a magnificent temple near the northwestern coast of the mainland Lazer Laza, which means the seat of the sky. Since then, the Ilun sisters in the Night Empire have shifted their work focus to this new temple city, and there has been an endless stream of Night Elves from all over the world going to the vault of heaven to study and pray. Chandrese aspired to become a Luna priest since she was a child. When Andrea embarked on a study trip to Mount Hyjal, she also set off with her. Chandrese's goal of the sky seat is not far southwest of Mount Hyjal. UU reading www.uuganshu.com. Both embarked on a learning journey with anticipation for the future, and have not returned to their homelands for hundreds of years since, which is not surprising in the near-immortal night elves' sense of time. But Chandris and Andrea never thought that the farewell to their family members before leaving would be the last time. The demons that suddenly invaded destroyed their hometown, and all the family members died under the ravages of demons. So that's how it is. No wonder this kid's mind is full of hatred for demons. Even if his soul dissipates, there is still a strong resentment left. Andrea sighed softly. Even if Chandris didn't tell him what happened next, he could probably guess it. Looking at the handsome and slender Chandris with a weird expression, Andrea raised another weird emotion in order to suppress the instinct in his heart, and pressed his fingers between his eyebrows as if to cover up. Unrequited love is the furthest distance in this world. At this time, Chandris was not the heroic and tough sentinel general, but as the saying goes, 3 years old and 80, although the current Chandris is still very immature, she can already vaguely see some of the heroic spirit and demeanor of future generations. Since he didn't inherit the memory and all the emotions of his predecessor, and only got some physical instincts related to fighting, Andrea couldn't determine how far his predecessor and Chandris had developed. But judging by Chandris's attitude towards him, it is obvious that he is still far from being a lover. Looking up at the towering Mount Hyjal in the distance, Andrea swore silently in her heart, "Boy, you can go at ease, whether it is the hatred for demons or the feelings for Chandris, I will inherit it together. From now on, I am Andrea Moonshadow." When Andrea opened his eyes, all he could see was the boundless dark realm. Floating in this strange realm where time and space cannot be determined, Andrea's expression was in a daze with a hint of bewilderment. In the entire dark space, there is only a fist-sized light source in the southwest direction. Warm and bright light shines from a distance, but these lights cannot cover Andrea. As usual, Andrea still tried to swim clumsily towards the distant light in this gravity-free space. However, no matter how close he was, the distance between him and the light source never shortened. Infinitely extended space, infinitely extended time. In this weird space, all the physical rules that Andrea understood could not take effect, and he could only helplessly wave his limbs in the darkness in vain. In the quiet forest, Andrea suddenly sat up from the ground pale. Recalling the familiar dreams he had experienced several times, Andrea wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with lingering fear, and subconsciously turned his head to look southwest. It's this dream again, is this heralding something to me? Andrea in his previous life was a materialist atheist, and he would always remain skeptical about things he hadn't seen with his own eyes. But now he has even experienced such a bizarre thing as time travel. No matter how firm his atheism is, he will inevitably be impacted. Not to mention that in the world of Azeroth, gods are real. Leaving aside the demigods of the wilderness who are connected to the soul of Azeroth, first of all, the Moonilun, whom the night elves have believed in for countless years, is an unexplainable existence. Southwest, I think it's the direction of Lazar, the seat of the sky, right? Chandris had provided Andrea with a lot of useful information before, including the area they were in now, and the current progress of the War of the Ancients. After the chaos of the initial demon raids, rebels swarmed across the Night Empire. After the hateful Andrea and Chandris followed their mentors to join the rebel army, they were eager to fight and felt a little uneasy. They were ordered to Cenarius, the demigod of the forest, to Mount Hyjal to seek help from the demigod of the wilderness. The early stage of the rescue operation was very smooth. Cenarius led this elite army to kill the demons swarming around the capital, and arrived at the foot of Mount Hyjal unimpeded. But it is not easy to convince the rebellious demigods to fight side by side. If the demons of the Burning Legion had not just launched an attack on Mount Hyjal, the group of demigods who were accustomed to being free and unruly did not know how long it would be delayed. Both the demigod and the guardian dragon have decided to join the battle and are gathering near the capital Zenashari, that is to say. Andrea touched his chin and thought, the War of the Ancients has passed the early stage of being beaten blindly, and entered the middle and late stages. Now wait for the powerful thighs to gather and rush home. If Andrea remembers correctly, some accidents seem to have happened during the reinforcements gathering. For example, a younger brother who has never reached the level betrayed his tribe and joined the Burning Legion, and Deathwing, with the help of the powerful pressure of the Burning Legion's invasion, encouraged the guardian dragons to work together to create the dragon soul. Afterwards, he didn't keep his promise and used the dragon soul to wipe out the demons. Instead, he aimed this extremely powerful artifact at his brothers and sisters, which directly caused the blue dragon, which had suffered a frontal impact, to fall into a huge crisis of genocide. Shaking his head, Andrea put aside his messy thoughts. Forget it, that's not what I should care about now. While Cenarius was convincing the demigods of the wilderness, Chandris and Andrea received new quests. Their small convoy was ordered to Lazar Raza, the seat of the sky, to help the local resistance forces establish contact with Blackrook Castle, the main force of the rebel forces, and try to liberate the Alone sisters imprisoned by the Highborn will be High Evil. However, I don't know if someone has leaked the news. The demons attacking Mount Hyjal pulled out a partial division and laid an ambush on the only way for the special envoy. Andrea's predecessor died in this ambush, which allowed the soul of the Traverser to take over his body. This elite team suffered heavy losses under the ambush and was completely dispersed by the demon army. If Chandris hadn't been recognized by a wild hippogriff before leaving Mount Hyjal, and rushed to the vicinity of Andrea in time to take him away, I'm afraid Andrea, who had just crossed over, would sing a cool song again. It's cold. Andrea. Sensing the movement from her side, Chandris rubbed her eyes and got out of the temporary tent. Did you have the same nightmare again? Okay. Andrea said with a wry smile, sorry, I woke you up. Fine. Chandris patted her cheeks with her hands, trying to wake herself up quickly from the low pressure of getting up. Let's talk about that dream again. You said that the only light in that darkness came from the southwest? Could this be a sign of something? Andrea nodded, I think so too. Maybe it's a warning or reminder from some kind of supernatural power, but I'm not sure who the other party is, and for what purpose they hinted at me again and again with the help of dreams. Chandris tied her loose blue hair back into a high ponytail. She raised her eyes to look towards the southwest of the forest, and said thoughtfully, our southwest, Lazal Laza. Andrea looked at the sun that was gradually setting in the sky, and also got up and began to pack the tent. Even in order to continue the mission, we must rush to the Vault of Heaven as soon as possible. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com. I have a hunch that all mysteries will be revealed in this temple city. The living habits of the night elves are very different from that of humans. They are used to being nocturnal. The sunny day is the night elves' rest time, and the night when the silver frost is everywhere is their peak activity period. Andrea once thought that demons do not need to sleep before crossing, but it turned out that he was wrong. It was just a scene where the glass didn't want to be a demon sleeping, so he was lazy. Thanks to their racial traits, night elves can move more stealthily at night, and even have a talent called shadow escape in the game. Andrea and Chandris tried their best to avoid the patrols arranged by the demons at night, and with the help of the hippogriff, they narrowly slipped across the Burning Legion's blockade. After entering the control range of the Vault of Heaven, the number of demons has been greatly reduced until they gradually disappeared, replaced by the High Elves who arranged for the Moon Guards to martial law the whole city. Moon Guards are battle mages who use arcane combat. They are the most important military force of the Highborn. They are usually used to defend important areas of major cities. They have good combat capabilities and rich combat experience. Some traitor, who may now be blind, was once a member of the Moon Guard. After coming to the outskirts of the metropolitan area of the Vault of Heaven, Andrea felt the inexplicable call deep in his soul became clearer and clearer, but he still couldn't tear through the hazy fog to see the whole picture. However, considering that the seat of the sky is a temple city built by Queen Asherah to show respect to the Moon Elune, Andrea had a vague guess in her mind. Squinting his golden eyes and looking at the sky seat of the floating city suspended in midair, Andrea silently said in his heart, "Is that you? Elune, the moon god?" I don't know when, a rumor similar to a legend appeared among the night elves. People with golden eyes will definitely achieve great things in the future. According to the future development that Andrea has learned, this kind of achieve great things will be realized in a very dark and humorous way in the future. According to historical records, there are only 2 people in the night elves with golden eyes. One of them is Ashera, the queen who ruled the entire Dark Knight Empire, and the other is Illidan Stormrage. When Chandrese told her that she also has the golden eyes that can achieve great things in the legend, Andrea didn't feel any fluctuations in her heart, but wanted to laugh a little. It's really ironic, the real owner of the golden eyes was killed in the previous battle. Is this the so-called achievement of greatness? Although she still went to the Vault of Heaven with Chandrese according to the mission accepted by her predecessor, the real purpose of Andrea today is different from that of Chandrese. His main purpose is to find out who the dream entrusted to him is, and try to get the benefit of improving his chances of survival from this possible opportunity. That's right, survival, this is the first element that Andrea considers now. Whether it's finding a way back home that may not exist, or making something of Azeroth with your future vision, the most important prerequisite is survival. When Andrea played in the team in his previous life, he heard the leader repeatedly emphasize a sentence countless times. If you survive, you will have output. The War of the Ancients is the first planetary crisis that Azeroth has encountered since it possessed mortal civilization, but it will not be the last. If you want to survive in the crisis-ridden Azeroth, strong strength is one of the most important guarantees. After Chandrese's narration, Andrea roughly understood the abilities mastered by her predecessor. As the first generation of druids who followed Malfurion to learn the way of nature, Andrea was quite talented in controlling the power of nature, and it was said that he was even praised by Cenarius himself. But as a traverser, Andrea is well aware of the advantages and disadvantages of the force of nature. This kind of power is more stable and controllable, and it is the embodiment and extension of the will of nature and the spirit of the wilderness. But stability also means slow progress. Although they are the same as the 6 original forces of the universe, compared with the arcane and evil energy that have the ability to destroy the world, the force of nature has always been lacking in output power. Malfurion's future detonation of the Well of Eternity did not rely on the power of the Druids, but borrowed the dragon soul stolen by Illidan. The second defeat of the Burning Legion's invasion and the killing of Archimonde was not due to the Druids, but to the self-sacrifice of countless ancient spirits. It's embarrassing to say, even Cenarius, the demigod who is the source of Druids, will be killed by mere mortals in the future. Even he and the Green Dragon family, who also control the power of nature, including Queen Asira, were easily controlled by Zavis in the Emerald Nightmare. On the road of Druids, Andrea really can't see any light future. If, as Andrea expected, it was the Moon Elune who called him, it meant that Andrea might have another choice. An extremely dangerous option that has the potential to gain great power in a short period of time. The Moon Guard's defenses against the Vault of Heaven are very tight. As night elves, it is unrealistic for Andrea and Chandrese to sneak into the city with shadow escape. Fortunately, although these high-level elf mages are arrogant, at least they will not easily kill their compatriots. Under Chandrese's suggestion, the 2 led the hippogriff to the entrance below the floating city Lazaleza in a dignified manner. Stop! Several moon guards in enchanted light armor pointed their staffs at the 2, and the leader of the team looked at them vigilantly. Who are you? Why did you come to Lazaleza? Considering that Andrea has lost most of her previous memories, in order to avoid arousing suspicion when he said something wrong, Chandrese, who looked like an ordinary village girl, took off her leather armor and untied her ponytail into a braid. Take a step to chat with the other party. Dear Moon Guardian, we are pilgrims from the southern Ashen Vale forest. We came this time because we wanted to pray to Elune for a good weather next year at the Great Temple. The northeast direction was completely blocked by the demons, and Chandrese could only disguise the origins of the 2 of them. Ashenvale Forest? Pray. The small captain's brows were slightly raised, and there was a vague expression of disdain between his brows and eyes. Although I don't think prayers will have any effect on the current situation, but, hell, let's let you go. Under the captain's waving gesture, the moon guards gave way with sarcasm. One of the moon guards waved his staff backwards, and as the azure blue arcane light flashed, a winding mountain road leading to the floating city appeared in front of their eyes. Behind Andrea, the team leader pressed the tail of his stick against his back and pushed hard. Go. Don't expect us to launch a teleportation array for 2 civilians, just climb the mountain road honestly. Andrea looked up speechlessly at the winding mountain road with 9 twists and 18 turns. Although this mountain road does not look rugged, it is wide enough for 4 carriages to pass side by side. However, according to the information provided by Chandris, this road was originally used for passing caravans and large-scale troops. Ordinary people can use the teleportation array to directly reach the temple square in the seat of the sky. You. Wait. Andrea grabs Chandris by the wrist just as he's about to throw a tantrum. When Chandris turned his head to look over, Andrea shook his head calmly, and whispered in the ear of the other party's long purple elf, "Don't be impulsive, business matters." Feeling the hot wind blowing from Andrea beside her ears, Chandri's long ears trembled slightly, and a blush unconsciously appeared on her violet face. Well, listen to you. Seeing the two obediently starting to climb the mountain road, the group of moon guards laughed softly behind them. That's right, commoners should look like commoners. Don't think that you can enjoy the same treatment as the noble high elves. The envoys will definitely help us redefine the social order of the Dark Knight Empire, so let's lie on the ground obediently. An angry look appeared on Chandris's face. If Andrea hadn't been holding her hand all the time, the night elf girl might have gone into a fit long ago. This group of bastards. Since the demons invaded, their original arrogant nature has become more and more serious. I didn't expect that even the moon guards who used to hold their own identities are like this. Andrea turned her head and glanced at the talking and laughing moon guards behind her, with a weird smile on her face. Let's make them happy for a while now. I hope they can still laugh when they know the true purpose of the so-called God Envoy. Andrea never thought of herself as a white lotus, the Virgin Mary who repays grievances with kindness. Although she was able to tell clearly about right and wrong, everyone who was targeted by him had a deep understanding of the idiom that every grievance must be repaid. In front of the moon guard, Andrea winked at Chandris, who received a helpless look. Call out. A sharp whistle came from Chandri's mouth, and the hippogriff, which she had arranged to hide in the nearby woods, heard the master's call, and immediately flew towards the mountain road with its wings flapping. Under the vigilant watch of the moon guards, the two climbed up the back of the hippogriff one after another. Andrea smiled and put his 2 middle fingers together, and waved to them on his forehead. Don't bother everyone to send them off, please work hard for the watchdog work. Shua. Under the watchful eyes of a group of moon guards, the hippogriff soared into the sky and accelerated towards the sky seat in the sky. Haha, Andrea hummed a little tune comfortably, looking at the approaching floating city with great interest. Chandris turned her head to look at the moon guard who was getting smaller and smaller, and looked at her childhood sweetheart with a weird expression. Andrea, I always feel that, you seem to have changed a little bit. Hey? Is there? Andrea scratched her head pretending to be simple and honest, it may be because of memory loss. I can't remember some of the previous restraints and rules, which leads to a more presumptuous style of acting. Chandris shook her head, I don't think that's the reason. I can't say what's going on, maybe it's because I didn't pay attention to and understand you a while ago. Andrea's predecessor didn't know when he started to have a good impression of Chandris on a male-female level. But this level of goodwill was blurred a lot because of the overly familiar relationship between the two of them, causing the silly boy to maintain a state of secret love until the last moment of his life, and Chandris didn't know about it. Hundreds of years have passed since they each embarked on a learning journey. It was not until the Burning Legion invaded that the two reunited under the call of the Druids and the Alone Sisterhood. Experience and change are poorly understood. On the way to continue the flight, Chandris struggled for a while, and finally could only attribute the difference between Andrea and her cognition to the long-term separation and growth. Maybe it's a good thing. Chandris glanced at Andrea quietly from behind. Andrea was too honest in the past, and would always be bullied by other children. Rather than being bullied, I hope he can bully others. The premise is not to go too far. Lazaraza, the seat of the sky, as the name suggests, this city built by Queen Ashera herself is a city in the sky. Centered on the great temple of Luna's radiance in the very center of the city, countless large and small temple buildings cover the entire city. From Andrea's understanding, the Vault of Heaven is not a comprehensive city for civilians to live in, but the most important place of pilgrimage for believers who believe in the Moon Elune. Its status is similar to that of the Vatican on Earth. Every year, countless Elune believers travel thousands of miles to the seat of the sky to pray for blessings. The core area of the city has no space for the Moon Guards to intervene, and the Elune sisters build their own defense forces. According to the news that Andrea and Chandis received before, the Vault of Heaven is now implementing a policy of wide entry and strict exit. Ordinary people are still free to enter and pilgrimage, but if they want to leave Lazal Laza, they will definitely be subject to strict investigation. The purpose is to prevent the moon priests of this holy city from leaving without authorization and joining the front-line battlefield. The faith of Elune spread throughout the Night Elf society. Although the faith of the Highborn who controlled the arcane arts was relatively weak, it was not non-existent. Even Queen Ashera dared not challenge Elune's authority blatantly. If these priests are allowed to join the rebel army, and declare the Burning Legion as invaders in the name of the Moon God, and call on the people of the entire empire to stand up and resist, the position and actions of Queen Ashera and the Highborn will inevitably be questioned and criticized by countless believers. Resist. All the teleportation points from this city in the sky to the outside world are guarded by moon guards, like a floating island isolated from the world. When the hippogriff flew into the city, it was naturally attacked by the moon guards. The fooled colleagues at the door should have told them the news, and Andrea and Chandris were greeted by a large number of blue and white arcane missiles. The sudden attack made the pilgrims in the city panic, and they instinctively thought that there was an enemy attack. In front of the great temple of Luna's radiance, which was made of snow-white marble, a female night elf in a simple moon-white long dress slowly walked out of the gate, followed by a dozen women in priestly robes. "Your Excellency the High Priest! Please save us!" The woman known as the High Priest waved a little silvery white light onto the panicked believers, and the excitement of these believers eased a lot. The mature and beautiful High Priest said with a warm and loving smile, "Everyone, please don't worry, as long as you are still in the Vault of Heaven, the Sisterhood of Elune will guarantee your safety." After calming down the restless believers with the priests, the High Priest led the team back into the great temple, turning his head to look at a silver-haired woman with a resolute expression behind him with a serious expression. "Maiev, go find out what happened. The Moon Guard will not launch an air attack for no reason." The heroic priestess bowed her head respectfully and said, "Yes, High Priest." Under the faint moonlight, Maiev's figure gradually became illusory, and finally disappeared into nothingness. The High Priest looked at the dark sky outside the temple with his silver eyes, and murmured, "Dear Elune, is this the turning point you mentioned?" Chandris skillfully manipulated the hippogriff to avoid the dense barrage of bullets. Fortunately, the Moon Guard did not dare to go too far in this holy city, and did not blatantly set up an anti-air defense enchantment. Under the nimble dodging of the hippogriff, Andrea and Chandris finally landed smoothly in front of a certain temple building on the east side. Who? Priests of the Sisterhood of Elune have been on high alert since being placed under disguised house arrest. When the two landed, the group of priests with bows and arrows and three-petal moon blades immediately surrounded them. After entering the interior of the Vault of Heaven, Chandris will be home. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com. As a trainee priest, she can be regarded as a member of the Luna belief system anyway. Sisters, please put down your weapons. Chandris took out a silver badge engraved with a female prayer pattern from her chest and showed it to the group of vigilant priestesses. I am the trainee priest Chandris Feathermoon. I am here to assist the Sisters of Luna Radiance to liberate the blocked sky seat under the order of my mentor Tyron the Whisperwind priest. Andrea also lazily waved to the priests who had relaxed a lot. Hi everyone, I am here to assist on behalf of Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage. Unfortunately, the original elite team of more than 100 people was defeated by the demons. Kill-san, now only the two of us are left. Sisters, let them come here. A distant soft female voice came from a distance, and the priestesses immediately put away their weapons when they heard this voice. At the same time, a sound shadow holding a wheel saw suddenly appeared behind Andrea, and the sharp saw teeth were less than 5 centimeters away from his neck. Feeling the chill coming from behind, Andrea raised his hands and said speechlessly, Sister Priest, can you stop pointing such a dangerous weapon at me? Humph! Men are supposed to be forbidden to enter the Great Temple. You'd better be honest with me. If I find out that you have some unruly intentions. The voice just now came from afar again, Muv, be polite to our guests. Yes, High Priest Dejana. After the priest behind him withdrew his weapon, Andrea rubbed the back of her neck with goosebumps while turning her head thoughtfully to observe the beautiful priestess called Maiev. Maiev. Judging from that unique weapon, it should be the one I know. Maiev Shadow Song, the future leader of the famous Watchmen, one of the most high-end combat forces of the Night Elves, has received a lot of controversial comments because of her fiery and paranoid character. But this is all in the distant future, and Maiev is now just one of the priestesses of the Sisterhood of Elun. Due to her ability and leadership ability, Maiev has a high reputation among some groups of the Sisterhood, and many people regard her as the most favorable candidate for the next High Priest. However, Andrea knew that Maiev, who was presumed by most priestesses to be the next High Priest, would be defeated by Tyrande from the sky. This is also a matter of no choice, who let the Moon Elun personally send down the oracle to name Tyrande. As a belief system centered on Elun, the current High Priest Dejana could not go against the will of the goddess even if she had doubts. Maiev did not escort the two of them to the main hall with the other priestesses, and Chandris watched in puzzlement as she turned and jumped onto the outer wall of the temple. Won't Priest Maiev come with us to meet the High Priest? At this time, Maiev, who hadn't put on his armor yet, glanced back at Chandris, and then disappeared from everyone's sight without saying a word. Andrea twitched the corners of her mouth and smiled, she should have gone to help us tidy up our tails. This lady priest looks a little different from the priests I know. One of the priestesses explained softly, the Maiev priests are in charge of commanding the battle priests in the sisterhood. Their style of conduct is indeed different from that of ordinary missionary priests. I don't know what Maiev did after that. When Andrea, Chandris, and others arrived at the main hall of the Luna's Radiance Temple, the noise outside the temple had gradually subsided. On the way to the main hall, a huge statue about 10 meters high first appeared in front of Andrea. The image of the statue is portrayed as a female night elf who raises her hands to hold the moon. Her appearance looking up at the sky is relatively vague. She wears a dress similar to the priest's long skirt, but the decoration is more simple and elegant. At the foot of the statue is a small lake that exudes light blue light. Gentle energy evaporates from the surface of the lake, and the soft light illuminates the lower body of the statue wearing a long dress of a priest. Andrea looked at the statue with a dazed look in his eyes. This is the image of Elun in the night elves' minds. By the way, are you so sure that she is a night elf? Andrea had seen a saying before. As the rare true of Azeroth, Elun, the moon god, should choose the native species of Azeroth if she wants to condense a physical form in the material world. However, an embarrassing situation has emerged. The Night Elves are not the original native species of Azeroth, but their predecessor trolls. That is to say, if it is not considered whether the Night Elves can accept it, Elun is more likely to transform into a female troll. While Andrea was running the train in his mind, a chuckle from nowhere appeared directly in his mind. He, do you really think so? Andrea was shocked. Who? Andrea, who suddenly froze and looked around, startled the surrounding priestesses. Chandris patted his friend on the shoulder in confusion. Andrea. Andrea turned her head and looked at the bewildered priests in surprise. Did you hear anyone talking? All the priestesses, including Chandris, showed weird expressions. No. Chandris covered Andrea's head with her silver shimmering right hand, and after a short inspection, she frowned and asked worriedly, although your spirit is a little flustered, there is no confusion. What happened? What's the matter? Do not. There was a trace of cold sweat on Andrea's forehead. He wiped his cheeks and pretended to be relaxed and said, it's nothing. It may be the sequelae of brain damage and loss of memory. I have symptoms of auditory hallucinations. A priestess who seemed to be the oldest and steady showed pity in her eyes, and said lovingly, you must have suffered a lot along the way, please persevere, Your Excellency the High Priest will heal your inner wounds. I hope so. Andrea looked up at the statue in the center of the small lake. If I told them that the suspected existence of Elune just spoke to me directly, I don't know if this group of priestesses with strong beliefs would fall into self-doubt on the spot. The official organization responsible for managing Elune's faith is called the Elune Sisterhood, and the composition of the priests of Elune can be known from this name. All priests, without exception, are women. The current leader of the sisterhood is Dejena. She was born in a peaceful age, but her style is more than stable but not decisive. Facing the massive invasion of the Burning Legion and the aggressiveness of the Highborn, High Priest Dejena's style tends to be conservative. She wants to resolve the differences between the Highborn and the commoners through peaceful talks. If it was in a peaceful age, although this approach would be slow to take effect, it was more stable and controllable, and time was a worthless resource for the Night Elves, who had the Well of Eternity and lived almost forever. But the current enemy army is overwhelming, and countless compatriots die tragically at the hands of the devil every day. It is not so appropriate to continue to adopt this kind of gentle approach. This has made many people in the sisterhood complain about the High Priest. Although not stated explicitly, most of the priestesses hope that a more courageous sister will take over as leader and lead them to resolutely resist the invasion of the Burning Legion. This is also the reason why Maiev, as the leader of the battle priests, can gain high prestige. High Priest Dejena is a kind-hearted elder. Although due to the racial characteristics of the Night Elves, she can't see the slightest sign of aging from her still beautiful face, but the temperament that has accumulated over the years can be vaguely felt. The long time she has been through. Thank you, sisters. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Please leave a little private space for me and the two guests. After the other priests bowed respectfully and stepped back, High Priest Dejena's eyes with a faint silver light kept circling between Chandris and Andrea. Chandris, who is still young now, didn't see the deep meaning in the High Priest's eyes. She took a step forward to report her intentions to the High Priest. Dejena didn't interrupt Chandris's narration, and had been silently listening to her report on the status quo of the battlefield with a gentle and loving smile, but her attention gradually shifted from Chandris to the absent-minded and silent on Andrea. After entering the interior of this great temple known as the closest to Elune, the vague voice that Andrea had been hearing intermittently before was gradually amplified. Maybe just like the star soul of Azeroth needs a spokesperson, the words of the true are difficult for mortals to understand. Andrea's mind was filled with countless messy murmurs and whispers. For a moment, he even thought that he had fallen into the trap of the ancient gods. The clear words with a smile seemed to be illusory, the flower through the looking glass and the moon in the water. Andrea finally couldn't hold back the swelling pain in his brain. After receiving too much information, he covered his head in pain, and his body began to shake unconsciously. Just as Andrea was about to faint, High Priest Dejena reached out to support him in time, and Chandris noticed that her little friend was not in a normal state. High Priest? Andrea, this is... Dejana waved her hand with a serious expression and interrupted Chandri's worried inquiry. She looked deeply at Andrea, who had passed out with half-opened eyes, and Dejana left behind those eyes that shone with pale golden light. Deep impression. My lord, Ilun, it turned out to be him. Andrea had the same dream again. This time he could feel that the ray of light that seemed never to be touched was approaching, but no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't touch the ray of light that was so close. Hey, is that really the case? An ethereal sigh came from the boundless darkness. Before Andrea could figure out the source of the sound, his consciousness suddenly left this strange space and returned to his body. Puff! Exhaling suddenly and sitting up from the lying state, Andrea panted heavily in shock. Can you be more straightforward? Why do you need to make it so mysterious? Looking around, Andrea found that she was moved to an empty lounge in a coma. Is anyone there, Chandris? Your Excellency the High Priest. Andrea rolled over from the bed and tried to call the last two people she saw before she passed out, but she couldn't get any response. Squeak! Pushing the door open, Andrea found that her recuperating room was located by a courtyard corridor, surrounded by more than a dozen doors that looked exactly the same. A large number of white jade-like marble stone pillars are erected on the outer edge of the corridor, and in the center of the courtyard are many unknown but fragrant flowers and plants. Where is this? Inside the great temple. At this time, the sky had already brightened, and the bright red sun hung high in the sky. There was no one around the courtyard, which made Andrea feel quite weird. It stands to reason, shouldn't there be a strict defense system in the great temple? Just like it's bedtime, 24-hour shifts shouldn't be a problem, right? Andrea didn't know anything about the structure of the temple. He could only follow some inexplicable sensory guidance, walking through the large temple complex in a daze. The whispers that had caused him to fall into a coma disappeared completely at some point, replaced by an unknown attraction, guiding Andrea to move forward in the temple. In the end, Andrea stopped in front of a side hall with closed doors and windows, and the call he sensed came from this small side hall. I'd like to see what you're up to. After hesitating for a moment, Andrea firmly pushed open the door in front of her. Crack! Squeak! I don't know how many years this door has not been opened, and the bearings that support the rotation of the door come from the ear-piercing friction sound of serious corrosion. With the opening of the door, a certain existence that had been locked inside was liberated, and a cold breath emanated from the side hall. The source came from a deep purple gemstone placed on the marble platform in the deepest part of the hall. This near-perfect round gemstone is suspended directly above the platform, and during the rotation process, it continuously emits a certain kind of pure energy to the surroundings, which is cold and deep. Gudong. Andrea swallowed nervously, but in the end he decided to follow the call and slowly moved towards the gemstone. He stretched out his trembling right hand, and finally grasped the suspended gem, and the pure energy immediately poured into Andrea's body. After waiting anxiously for a moment, Andrea was surprised to find that she hadn't suffered any damage or erosion. Spreading out his right hand, he looked thoughtfully at the deep purple gemstone in his hand that seemed to be able to absorb all light. If I'm not mistaken, this gemstone should be the legendary Eye of Elun, right? Andrea is basically sure that the pure power from the gem is the opposite of the power of light, the void, or the power of shadow. But the power of shadow that is difficult to control in the world's impression is like a docile cat, flowing quietly in Andrea's body, without the slightest sign of causing trouble. Let me think. Trying to remember the process of Tyrande praying to Elun for revenge in version 8.15, Andrea made a plan for herself. Although I don't know why there is no one guarding here, but the next step should be to find a moon well to sacrifice to. Thinking of this, Andrea pulled the silver beard on his chin with a headache. Where do I go to find the sacrifice of the enemy? Do I have to kill a demon outside the city and bring back his head? Then Andrea shook his head with a wry smile and denied himself, considering the moon guards under martial law outside the city, this is not realistic at all. Forget it, let's find a moon well first. Speaking of the moon well, Andrea immediately thought of the statue outside the great temple of Luna's radiance. The small lake at the foot of the statue exuding weak energy should be one of the manifestations of the moon well. I began to suspect that this was deliberately arranged by High Priest Dejana. It took a while to find the way, and finally Andrea came to the small lake in front of the statue of Elune unimpeded. Andrea looked around speechlessly. The most important passage into the main hall was not guarded by any priests. This situation is not normal even if you think about it. Just as Andrea guessed, at this time the High Priest Dejana was standing on the tallest tower on the west side of the main hall, silently watching Andrea's actions. Maiev, who was behind the High Priest, frowned and asked, "High Priest, are you sure that Elune will bless him?" "Amen." Dejana smiled and explained, "Mav, the goddess will give her blessings equally to all those who believe in her. Don't be prejudiced against men because of the structure of the sisterhood." "But..." Dejana waved her hand and interrupted Mayev's questioning, "I know what you want to say, don't worry, his existence will not impact the foundation of the sisterhood, at least, not for the time being." "Well, I remember, it seems to be like this." Unaware that he was being watched by others, Andrea tried to put the eye of Elune in his hand into the large moon well in front of him. The originally light blue lake water quickly changed color the moment the gem entered the water, with the eye of Elune as the center. The deep purple hue covered the entire lake in the blink of an eye. Due to the lack of rituals to sacrifice blood to the enemy, Andrea was originally prepared not to get any response, but as the moon well changed color, various visions began to appear. The bright sky suddenly became dark, and the sun, which was exuding light and heat, seemed to be shrouded in a layer of purple veil, and gradually recovered its own light. Instead, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. The moon that shouldn't be visible during the day hangs high in the dark purple sky with a brightness several times that of usual. This vision of the changing color of the sky and the earth is not limited to the vicinity of the vault of heaven's seat, even the outskirts of Xin Isali, where the fierce battle is taking place, have also undergone changes. A green-haired elf woman holding a longbow and wearing a moon-white priest's long skirt suddenly changed her face and looked up at the sky where the bright moon hung high. This feeling is Elune. In the center of Xin Isali, on the shore of the Well of Eternity, which is continuously swallowing demons, a beautiful woman with bright golden eyes is also looking at the sky with a serious expression. "Elune? Why did you stand up and take a stand at this time?" "Wow!" An astonishing energy channel was constructed between the bright full moon and the large moon well that turned dark purple on the ground, and the originally calm well water suddenly became boiling. Andrea, who was shrouded in the energy flow, seemed to be in a storm, and a huge amount of shadow energy was violently poured into his body. Well! The unbearable shadow energy turned Andrea into a blood man in just a few seconds, but another soft energy that continued to come from the sky repaired his wounds at the same time. Ah! The shadow energy penetrating through the body began to break through the critical point, and Andrea's physique was gradually changed under the scouring of pure energy. The original lavender skin became darker, and the golden eyes were only left with a layer of gold rings, and the pupils of the eyes completely turned into a deep dark purple that was almost pure black. Dejana looked solemnly at Andrea, who was completely shrouded in dark light at the center of the heaven and earth vision. The dark side of the moon. As Andrea and Chandris made their way to the celestial seat, the demigods from Mount Hyjal led many allies of nature to push back the demonic defenses. Facing the powerful demigods of the wilderness, ordinary demons couldn't stop their impact at all. When Andrea arrived at the seat of the sky, the demigod of the wilderness just pushed the battle line to the outskirts of the capital, Zenashari, and joined forces with the main force of the rebel army stationed in Black Rook Castle. At this time, the leader of the rebel army has changed twice. The first lord of Black Rook Castle, who raised the rebel flag in the name of King Chin, Cuteros Ravencrest, was assassinated by the queen he trusted very ironically. Taking over as Lord Ravencrest's commander-in-chief was his deputy, Distal Steri, also of noble origin. Although this person has a noble status, he is ambitious and talented, and does not have the ability to command the army. During the time he led the rebel army, the situation was frequent, and it was once on the verge of collapse. Perhaps it was because of Elun's pity that Steri died in a demon airstrike because of his wrong decision. Captain Jared Shadowsong, the captain of the Black Rook Castle Guard, temporarily took over the banner of the commander of the rebel army by virtue of his keen intuition on the battlefield situation and his innate leadership skills. The commander was convinced. However, Jared, who was suddenly in a high position and was born as a commoner, always had doubts about his talent. At this time, Cenarius arrived with the demigods of the wilderness. Headed by Cenarius, the demigods expressed their obedience to the excellent commander Gerald one after another. This unexpected gift made Gerald's reputation reach its peak immediately, and the rebels with their own minds finally was completely twisted into a rope. The phenomenon of the changing color of the world happened at this time. This strange phenomenon attracted the attention of everyone inside and outside the battlefield. Between surprise and suspicion, both sides temporarily slowed down their offensive and defensive rhythms. Archdruid Malfurion Stormrage turned to look at his girlfriend, Tyrande Whisperwind, High Priest of the Elun Sisterhood. Tyrande, you say this is a vision caused by Elun. Tyrande frowned and looked at the bright moon shrouded in black light in the sky. It's not wrong, this familiar feeling is undoubtedly Elun, but I have never felt this form of power in Elun. Pass. As Elun's chosen heir to the High Priest, Tyrande is more closely associated with Elun than any other priest of the Sisterhood. In some special cases, she can even gain short-term divine powers from Elun, who has no direct access to the physical world. But usually what Tyrande felt from Elun was the power of moonlight with powerful healing and auxiliary effects, but now she had never seen this kind of cold, dark, strange power with amazing oppressive power. Tyrande clasped his hands together, silently closed his eyes and prayed to the moon in his heart. Elun, please tell your faithful believer, what happened, why do you want to show your anger to the world at this moment? Lazar Laza, the seat of the sky, when everything subsides, the full moon disappears, and the sun illuminates the sky again. The moon well in front of the Luna's Radiance Temple also regains its usual blue and clearness, as if everything before all images are just illusions. But Dejana and Maiev, who witnessed the mutation, knew very well that something had begun to change. The evidence was the young man they were staring at with piercing eyes at the moment, Andrea Moonshadow, who was half kneeling in front of the moonwell and remained silent. Maiev, who has better eyesight, first noticed Andrea's half-opened eyes, and the eerie gold-rimmed black pupils made her instinctively uneasy and vigilant. High Priest, what power does the dark side of the moon represent? Why does it look so weird? Dejana shook her head with a solemn expression. I don't know, this kind of power representing Elun's most ruthless moon phase has never appeared before, and I only saw some records in the documents left by the previous High Priests. There were priests who tried to summon the power of the dark side of the moon to Elun before, but without exception, they were all overwhelmed by the huge dark energy, and no one succeeded. Maiev frowned slightly, and looked at Andrea, who was still standing still, with deep meaning. A dark force. Chandris and the priests, who were deliberately dismissed by the High Priest of Digana, are discussing how to break through the blockade of the city by the Moon Guard, so that the main force of the Elun sisters can also rush to the front to participate in the decisive battle to expel the demons. When the battle priest who was in charge of guarding outside the house told the group of priestesses about the mutation, they just went out to watch the ending. Chandris looked at the direction where the dark moonlight was falling, and his expression moved. That direction is the great temple of Luna's Radiance. The leading senior priest immediately commanded loudly, "Quick! Hurry back to the temple and find out why this huge force of darkness descended on the great temple." With a large amount of shadow power entering his body, Andrea lost his ability to perceive the outside world early, completely immersed in his own spiritual world. Just as he guessed, the power of the dark side of the moon is powerful and dangerous. After receiving such a huge amount of dark energy at once, Andrea once thought that his body would be exploded by the excess energy. However, in the end he persisted in the continuous process of destruction and restoration, and he absolutely did not want to experience that indescribable pain a second time. The original power of nature in Andrea's body was not completely annihilated by the power of shadow, but there is no doubt that some changes have taken place in the blended shadow and natural energy. At this time, Andrea didn't have time to experience this change carefully, and he was trying to regain control of this strange body. Under the watchful eyes of Dejana and Maiev, the half-kneeling Andrea stood up slowly. But it seems that he didn't control the power well for a while. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com. His left hand suddenly turned a deep dark purple, and the whole forearm also became translucent, as if suddenly changing from a solid state to an energy body same. Mayev's eyes flashed, out of control. Do not. Dejana's silver eyes stared at Andrea. The energy in his body didn't appear to be in a large-scale disorder. It should just be that he still can't grasp the new power he just acquired. As Dejana said, Andrea felt like a balloon with air leaking everywhere at this time, and if she didn't pay attention, a part of her body would enter a strange semi-energy state. It took several minutes for Andrea to gradually become familiar with the power of shadow directly instilled by Elune. Compared with the gentle force of nature, the power of shadow is much more lively and mischievous. But at least for a short period of time, he didn't feel the spiritual erosion and difficulty in controlling the power of shadow mentioned many times by the members of the Knights of the Shadow Emperor. Pure shadow power flows silently in his body, and with Andrea's active familiarity, he has been able to gradually control this unruly power. Moon Knight God of War. The corner of Andrea's mouth curled up in a mocking arc. This self-proclaimed title is really full of holes. How did you become the God of War as a priest? Feeling the huge energy in his body that had increased by at least 10 times compared to before, Andrea looked at the blue sky that had become clear again and took a deep breath. Let's leave it to others to give titles or something. Anyway, now I finally have the power to protect myself. Turning his head to look at the tower on the west side of the statue, Andrea's mouth was slightly pulled, and the whisper wrapped in the power of shadow was directly transmitted to the minds of Dejana and Maiev. Are you right? Your Excellency the High Priest. When Chandris rushed to the scene with a large army of priests, everything had already been settled. After High Priest Dejana recovered the Eye of Elune, all the visions completely dissipated, and the Eye of Elune, which originally exuded a hazy, dark light, now became no different from ordinary gems. Andrea lazily waved to Chandris who was walking at the back of the crowd. How about it, have you discussed a breakout plan? Today's Chandris is far from the high-ranking sentinel general of the later generations. She is just a trainee priest, and she is very unconfident among the senior ranks of the Elune Sisterhood. This can be seen from her slightly timid position. This girl is obviously not able to adapt to such a big scene of high-level gatherings. Chandris glanced at the big bosses around, and deliberately lowered his voice and said, "We have only initially determined the general direction, and the details are still under discussion," and then, staring fixedly at Andrea's deep purple and near-black pupils, Chandris continued worriedly, "Andrea, did the changes in the world just now have anything to do with you? Your eyes? Well, this one." Andrea scratched her head in embarrassment, and took the opportunity to turn her head to look at High Priest Dejana. Dejana immediately understood what Andrea meant when she received Andrea's throwing eyes. Sighing softly, the High Priest stood up and said, "Sisters, it was Elune who sent the blessing and the oracle just now, and Mr. Andrea is the recipient. We must break through the blockade of the Vault of Heaven and rush to the battlefield as soon as possible. The situation on the front line seems not to be optimistic." With the help of the High Priest to endorse, Andrea was also happy to be at leisure. Under Mayev's nonchalant scrutiny, Andrea secretly waved to a certain little quail hiding behind the big brothers. At this time, Chandris couldn't see the straightforwardness and decisiveness in the past at all. She cautiously confessed her sins to the priests around her, and walked cautiously to her friend's side. Hey, seeing Chandris's timid look, Andrea patted her on the shoulder heavily. Take out your confidence and hold your chest up. You are the messenger sent by the High Priest of Whisper Wind. To some extent, your performance represents the attitude of the Whisper Wind priest. If you continue to contact other priests with such a humble and low profile, it will only make others look down on your mentor and discredit the Whisper Wind priest. Chandrese opened her mouth, but Mr. Andrea is right. High Priest Dejana explained the strange situation just now and walked towards the two of them. Maiev still followed behind her every step, and her vigilant eyes never left Andrea. Kindly touching Chandrese's indigo hair, Dejana smiled and comforted, "Don't worry about offending people with your words, the Alone Sisterhood is just like the name, and the members in the organization are sisters to each other. As the only people in the task force who rushed to report, your attitude represents the will of Tyrande and Archdruid Storm Rage. Please express what they want to convey as completely as possible." It's the High Priest. As a person who suffered head trauma and lost memory, Andrea did not participate in the subsequent meeting. After entrusting the task of passing the message to Chandrese, Andrea returned to the previous courtyard calmly under someone's escort. The garden filled with the fragrance of flowers can be exposed to the warm sunshine in the afternoon. From the temperature of the light, Andrea can confirm that the current season is definitely not a hot summer. Not long ago, Andrea wasn't quite used to the night elves' living habits of being nocturnal and nocturnal. On the way to the Vault of Heaven, he and Chandrese rested during the day and traveled at night. After careful calculation, he hadn't basked in the sun so leisurely for many days. Ha slumped comfortably on a bench in the courtyard. Andrea ignored a certain priestess who was squatting behind a white jade pillar in a stealthy state, and half closed her eyes to enjoy the warm sunlight. Since Leon accepted Elun's infusion of shadow power, the technique of stealth, which uses the power of shadow to eliminate the figure, has no meaning in his eyes. If sneaking is to use black code blocks to cover oneself up, Andrea's eyes now have a decoding effect. "You are really strange." As if aware of her whereabouts being exposed, Maiev simply walked to the bench where Andrea was slumped. "Okay." Lifting his eyelids lazily, Andrea asked with a chuckle, "What's so strange?" Maiev folded her hands in front of the bear, and said in a flat tone, "Most of the night elves love the night and hate the day, and they worship the moon far more than the Sunday. As far as I know, in the entire vast night empire, only a very small number of mavericks will go out to bask in the sun during the day, and among them is a famous high-level elf family." Maiev looked at Andrea deeply and asked, "Could it be that you are a descendant or distant relative of that family?" Andrea rolled her eyes, "It's a boring speculation, I just like the warm touch when basking in the sun, not worshipping the Sunday." Regarding the family that Maiev mentioned, Andrea had a rough guess in her mind. Sunstrider? Right. Maiev seems to have turned a corner in her head. Ilun, the moon god, will not give her blessings for no reason, let alone a male outside the sisterhood. Looking up and down Andrea with sharp eyes, Maiev said thoughtfully, "There must be something special about you that Ilun values." Forward. Mavena's eyes that seemed to be scanning the prey made Andrea shiver. He knew very well how obsessed the future watcher was with the prey, and Andrea didn't want to be her hunting target. Correct. In order to change the subject, Andrea slapped his palm and said, "Priest Maiev, as I remember, your last name is Shadow Song, right?" Maiev nodded slightly, "That's right, what's the problem?" "Well, I suddenly recalled the news I heard recently." Andrea touched the beard on his chin with a smile. "If the information provided by the demigod Cenarius before the farewell is correct, the commander-in-chief of the rebel army now seems to be called Jared Shadow Song. Is he your family member?" "What did you say?" Maiev suddenly grabbed Andrea by the collar, and Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com lifted him up from the chair. At this time, Maiev could no longer see the calmness before, and she asked a little emotionally, "You mean Garrett? He is the leader of the rebel army? How is it possible? He is just an ordinary person in Blackrook Castle. You are the captain of the city guard." Unexpected reaction. Andrea smiled and spread his hands and said, "At least according to the information I got, Mr. Garrett seems to have been on the line of fire only recently. His previous 2 commanders both died on the battlefield. One was assassinated by the Highborn, and the other was smashed by the Burning Legion's air strike. Mr. Garrett was elected as the new commander-in-chief by virtue of his talent and the late Lord Ravencrest's respect. He should be leading the army on the battlefield now." "Damn." Maiev put down Andrea's neckline, and paced around a little anxiously. "Jared, he is my own brother." Mayev's face fluctuated for a while, and finally she gritted her teeth, gave up continuing to monitor Andrea, turned her head and strode towards the main hall. "I'll arrange someone else to watch you. I hope you didn't make fun of Garrett." Andrea smiled and waved to Mayev's back. "Go slowly." Sure enough, the relationship between Maiev and Jared is still very good at this time. I hope this fire can speed up the actions of the sisterhood. Looking up to the far east, after accepting the infusion of Elun's power, Andrea could feel the terrifying energy emanating from the huge energy source in the distance from the seat of the sky thousands of miles away. The Well of Eternity, a double-edged sword with blessings and misfortunes. As the leader of the battle priests recognized by many sisters, even the high priest Dejana could not take Mayev's opinion lightly. Driven by her strong support, a consensus was soon reached within the sisterhood. Tomorrow night, they will formally break up with the Moon Guard, break through the blockade of the Vault of Heaven, and strive to reach the main battlefield before the start of the war. In name, Andrea was just a druid, and he had nothing to do with the internal decisions of the Elun sisterhood, but he planned to play a role in the implementation of the plan, just in time to try the new power he had just acquired. After staying up all day, the priests of the sisterhood alternated between catching up on sleep as it got dark, and Chandri's was no exception. But Andrea, due to the sufficient sleep before, entered a state of excitement after entering the night. The crescent moon in the sky is casting a faint silver light on the courtyard, and Andrea is standing in the center of the courtyard at this moment, bathing in the moonlight which is cooler than the sunlight. His spirit gradually entered a special state of detachment, and he was deeply immersed in his own spiritual sea. "Son, can you hear me now?" The soft and gentle female voice seems to penetrate directly into Andrea's soul. Perhaps the word voice is inherently problematic, and Andrea seems to communicate directly with a great being through the spirit. "Yes, Elun, the moon god." Andrea, who usually looked carefree, seemed very respectful and polite at this time. His translucent soul body saluted the silver light ball in front of his chest. "Thank you for your gift, which allows me to have the most basic ability to protect myself in this crisis-ridden world." The soft female voice came out again from the ball of light. "Don't thank me, I just use pure energy to wash your body with high intensity, so as to get rid of the impurities in your body and guide out the talents you originally possessed." "Talent?" Andrea was taken aback for a moment, and then said in a daze, "So, I was born with a shadow-friendly physique." "Wrong." Elun said with a smile, "On the contrary, like the other 2 night elves with golden eyes, you are born with a very high talent for the power of light. Because of the mutual transformation characteristics of light and shadow, and the special features of your soul, you also have the same powerful shadow talent." Andrea's smile was fixed on his face, and he uttered a questioning voice with a confused face, "Hey?" Elun didn't care about Andrea's distraction. She continued with some regrets, "If you continue to follow the bright path, you will surely grow to a height beyond the reach of other mortals, unfortunately." Ashera was attracted by the Well of Eternity and chose the arcane path. In order to win Tyranda's heart, Illidan Stormrage blindly pursued great power, and even turned to the Burning Legion to go deep into the enemy's rear to spy on intelligence. He naively thought that he could regain Tyranda's heart by making great achievements. Hearing this, Andrea frowned slightly. Has the demon hunter been born yet? Elun's style changed, and she said to Andrea with a deep meaning, "And you, it's another situation." The foreign soul merged with the broken soul of the body itself, forming a new soul form, and even began to affect the body in reverse. Even I have never seen such a situation. This. Andrea looked at the big silver ball of light in horror. Dear Elune, do you know my true origin? Certainly. Elune chuckled and said, I noticed you as early as when you came to Azeroth, my outsider family. Andrea stepped forward and approached the big ball of light and asked anxiously, then can you send me back to the original world? My parents must be very worried about my situation. Elune was silent for a few seconds before replying regretfully, I'm sorry, child. Not to mention that I can't trace which world your soul came from and how to send you back. Moreover, since you entered Azeroth in the form of a soul, it means, your body has already disappeared in the original world. Die. Even if you can return to your home world, your body cannot be resurrected, unless you use death spells to turn your body into an undead. Can you accept that? Elune's explanation made Andrea's brain go blank, and the folklore of not being allowed to become a master after the founding of the nation repeated in his mind. It took a while for Andrea to twitch the corners of her mouth, and murmured with a weird expression that couldn't help but ask, so, I can't go back? I'm afraid so, son. Elune comforted her softly, although I can't be sure why your soul was attracted to Azeroth. I think it should be related to the Burning Legion breaking through the dimension and building a large-scale portal through the Well of Eternity. Spatial disturbance. Yes, in the absence of sufficient evidence, this guess should be the closest to the truth. Andrea clenched her fists tightly, and the blank expression on her face gradually became firm and ferocious. The Burning Legion, another reason to destroy you. Elune comforted softly, son, don't let hatred fill your life. Destroying the Burning Legion is certainly a lofty ideal, but I hope you will not give up other good things because of it. First of all, I want to apologize to you, because the secrecy of your soul is too low, and I accidentally read the flashing picture in your memory just now. This? Andrea asked with a painful face, Dear Elune, that is to say. I have no secrets at all in front of you, and even what is in my heart can be easily perceived. Yes, although I will not take the initiative to read your thoughts, but when your mood swings are more intense, certain memories will naturally emerge. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Andrea sighed and said, well, it seems that how to improve one's mental closure is also a topic that needs to be studied in the future. So, which piece of memory did you read just now? About Illidan Storm Rage. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Elune said with some emotion, although I don't know where you got the fragment of the future, I have to say that the ending of that demon hunter fits his character and behavior style very well. After completely losing hope of winning back Tyranda's heart, Illidan regarded the destruction of the Burning Legion as his only belief in his life. In order to achieve this goal, he is willing to give everything for it, and he can also be ruthless to make cruel orders that no one else can give. Elune said earnestly, Andrea, I don't want your future to be as empty as his. Try to embrace the world. There are more beautiful things in Azeroth waiting for you to discover and touch. Andrea smiled wryly and rubbed the center of her brows. I will try my best, thank you for your enlightenment, Great Moon Elune. Elune's words revealed a sense of relief, it's just that you are willing to accept my suggestion. Time is running out, and my consciousness cannot be projected into the material world for a long time. Elune's voice became more and more distant, and she finally left a request. Andrea, another of my family members, Tyranda, is in big trouble. I must leave her with the last bit of strength left in this world. My strength alone is enough to protect myself, but I can't get her out of trouble. I hope you can help her. I know Tyranda. She is a person with clear grievances. One day in the future, she will definitely try her best to repay your kindness. After Elune's consciousness faded away from the material world, Andrea's body standing in the courtyard of the great temple opened her eyes. Big trouble. Stretching out his left hand and stroking the beard on his chin, Andrea said thoughtfully, is it this time? It seems that we must act as soon as possible.